The cry in the shadows, the wind howled across the ruined world like a starving beast. Metal scraps banged together. Ash floated in the air. The sky was a thick gray, hiding the sun for weeks. Everything smelled of smoke and rot. Beneath the broken shell of a destroyed ship, something moved. A small boy lay motionless on a cold floor made of cracked steel. His face was pale blue, his lips dry. His chest rose and fell too slowly. Beside him, a woman, thin, trembling, her eyes wild with fear, held him close. Her skin was pale purple and bruised. Her clothes were torn, barely covering her body. But she didn't care about herself. She only looked at the boy, her son. She was shaking from cold and hunger, but she gently pushed a tiny piece of dried root to his mouth. He didn't respond. Her hand trembled harder. She whispered something in her alien language and placed the root on his tongue. Suddenly, a soft mechanical buzz echoed in the air. Her eyes widened in panic. A drone. She pulled the child under her arms and froze. The drone hovered above, its red scanning light sweeping the ruins. One sound could bring death. She didn't breathe. She didn't blink. Then the drone's light stopped. It focused on her. The woman flinched. From above the clouds, far away in a human military control room, a soldier named Mason leaned forward. He looked through the drone's camera. At first, he thought it was another scavenger hiding. But then he saw the child. Then the woman's face. She looked straight into the camera, not with anger, not with fear, with something else. Her lips moved. Slowly. The drone had no sound, but Mason could read her lips. It wasn't English, but the translation AI worked quietly. Feed my son, not me. Mason's chest tightened. She didn't beg for food, didn't cry for help, didn't scream. She just whispered a request to save her child. He stared at her bruises, at the thin bones under her skin. She looked like she hadn't eaten in days, maybe weeks. But still, she wanted nothing for herself. Feed my son. Not me. The words repeated in his mind like a bell. Soldier Mason. A voice came over the comms, sharp and cold. Scan complete. Confirm target is non-threat. Mark for cleanup. Extraction squad will clear the zone. Mason didn't answer. Soldier, do you copy? He still said nothing. Instead, he turned off his mic. Then he reached into his field bag and pulled out a wrapped package, 2 protein bars, and a small thermal blanket. He looked at the live drone feed one more time. The woman still held her son, unmoving, her eyes never blinking, waiting for death or mercy. Mason stood. He wasn't supposed to break rules. He wasn't supposed to go down without command, but something in him moved, deep, maybe. It was the way her arms stayed around the boy. Maybe it was the way she didn't care if she died, as long as her son lived. Or maybe it was because once, long ago, Mason's own mother had whispered the same words when they were starving on a refugee ship. Feed my boy, not me. He couldn't forget that. Not then, not now. He left his station. 5 minutes later, his boots hit the frozen dirt of the ruined world. He followed the drone's path through the shipwrecks, stepping over broken panels and burnt-out machines. The air was thick and hard to breathe. But he moved fast. When he reached the ruin where the drone had found them, he stopped. Carefully, he set down his rifle and held out his hands. Hey, he said softly, knowing she might not understand. I'm not here to hurt you. There was no answer. He knelt and slowly showed the food in his hand. For your son. Her eyes locked on the food, then back to him. Suspicion burned in them. But so did something else, desperation. She didn't move. He gently placed the food on the ground and stepped back. The woman hesitated. Then, with weak arms, she lifted her boy and slowly crawled forward. Her body shook with every inch. She reached the food and pressed it to the boy's mouth. His lips moved. Mason exhaled in relief. The woman looked up at him. Her eyes, once full of fear, now held something else. Hope that she didn't say thank you. She didn't need to. Mason already knew something had changed. This wasn't just a broken alien mother. This was the beginning of something far bigger. And he had just taken the first step. Asterisk snowflakes drifted softly from the sky, landing on the edges of the broken ship like ashes. The wind had quieted, but the cold was still sharp enough to bite through skin. Mason stood silently as the alien woman fed her son with trembling hands. The boy chewed weakly. Just a few bites, but it was enough to bring a tiny bit of color back to his bluish lips. The woman's arms stayed wrapped around him. She watched every move Mason made, ready to shield her child again, even if her body gave out. Mason kept his hands out where she could see them. He moved slowly, showing her the second protein bar. He broke it in half and placed one piece down near her, then stepped back again. She didn't touch it, not yet. Instead, she broke her piece into even smaller crumbs and pressed them gently to her son's lips. The boy blinked once and made a soft sound. She closed her eyes and pressed her forehead to his. Mason took a quiet breath. He had seen war. He had seen death. But something about this felt different. Like the rules he followed every day didn't matter here. Not in front of a mother this selfless. "I have more," Mason said, tapping his jacket. She didn't understand his words, but she tilted her head. Mason reached into his pocket again and pulled out a folded thermal blanket. He crouched and slowly unwrapped it, showing its warmth. He placed it on the ground between them. The woman stared at it. Then, for the first time, she looked directly into Mason's eyes. Her own eyes were big and glassy, deep violet, tired and full of pain. Still, she didn't beg. Didn't ask. She simply watched. Mason pointed to the boy and then the blanket, signaling that she could use it. Her gaze shifted to her son, and for a moment she hesitated, then carefully reached out and took it. She wrapped the child in it first. Only then did she cover her own shoulders. Mason sat down on a broken crate nearby. He didn't speak. He didn't try to get closer. He just stayed with them. Something in the air had changed. The silence between them wasn't empty. It was heavy, full of meaning. The woman finally took a small bite of the protein bar. Her hands shook so badly she nearly dropped it. She chewed once, twice, then stopped and looked away, ashamed. As if she had stolen it. Mason shook his head. "It's okay. You need it too." She didn't understand, but maybe she felt it. Her lips pressed together, and she swallowed. The child coughed lightly. Mason noticed the boy's skin had a strange shimmer. Alien, but beautiful. He had a tiny horn on one side of his head, barely visible, but he looked fragile, too thin, too cold. "What's his name?" Mason asked softly. She blinked, not understanding. He pointed at the boy, then at her. She tilted her head, thinking. Then her voice came, soft as wind. "Ravax," she whispered. Mason nodded. "Ravax, got it." Then he pointed at himself. "Mason." She hesitated. Then pointed. "Mason," she repeated it. Her voice had a soft accent, her tone almost musical. He smiled. She didn't smile back, but she didn't frown either. Progress. Suddenly, the woman looked up sharply. Her ears switched. Mason turned too. A faint sound, metal, echoing in the distance. Someone else was out there. She clutched Ravax and pulled him close. Her breathing sped up. Her eyes darted left and right. Mason stood up. "Stay here," he said. Even though she couldn't understand, he pulled his sidearm and moved quickly toward the sound. Between broken ship parts and frozen piles of debris, he spotted a floating signal drone. Military issue. It was scanning the area, probably trying to find him. Mason cursed under his breath. If they saw him with the alien woman and child, it would be reported. Command would send a squad. And they wouldn't ask questions. They would just clean up. He pulled out a device and jammed the drone's signal for 30 seconds, just long enough to disable its live feed. He tossed a rock at it, making it turn and drift away toward the noise. Then he hurried back to the woman and child. When he returned, she was holding a sharp piece of metal, ready to defend. He raised his hands. "It's okay. I'm here." She didn't lower the blade until he sat again and placed his weapon aside. "Danger," Mason said, pointing to the sky. "We need to move." She didn't understand that, so he did something unexpected. He placed his hand on his chest. "Safe," he said. Then pointed to her and Ravax. "Come with me." She watched him for a long moment, then very slowly. She nodded. Not because she trusted him fully, but because in a world where no one cared, this human had stayed, and that was more than anyone had done in a long time. The wind had picked up again. It howled between the twisted wreckage like a voice screaming from far away. The alien woman walked behind Mason, clutching her son in her arms. His small body was wrapped in the thermal blanket, his head resting against her shoulder. She looked left and right with every step. Her thin feet made no sound on the snowy ground, but her breath came out in clouds. Mason led the way, checking corners, scanning the sky for drones. He didn't speak, but every so often, he turned to make sure she was still there. They walked for nearly 20 minutes, deeper into the ruins where Mason had hidden his small portable shelter. It was nothing special, just a heat pod covered with scrap to keep it hidden, but inside, it was warm, and it had food, water, and light. When they reached it, Mason opened the hatch and motioned for her to enter first, but she hesitated. He stepped back to give her space. Only then did she step. In the heat inside touched her skin like sunlight for the first time in weeks. Her eyes closed. For a moment, she simply stood there, letting the warmth soak into her bones. Mason sealed the hatch behind them. "You're safe here," he said, even though he knew she didn't understand. The child made a soft noise. His fingers curled against her robe. Mason handed her a small water pack and motioned for her to drink. She took it and carefully gave it to Ravax first. Only after the boy had a few sips did she drink. Then finally, she sat down on a soft pad near the heat vent. Mason knelt across from her. "What happened to you?" he asked softly. She looked confused. He pointed at her, then slowly mimed an explosion with his hands. "Boom! What happened? Why are you out here alone?" She lowered her eyes. Her body seemed to grow even smaller. Then in a soft voice she began to speak in broken galactic common. "Big sky fire. Ships came. Take many. Kill many. No time." Mason leaned in, listening. She pointed upward. "Black ships. Not your kind. Others. They come at night. Take people. Chain them." "Slavers," Mason said grimly. She nodded. She looked down at Ravax. "Husband fight. Die. I run." Her voice trembled. "Now, they think I dead. Hide in trash. Many days no food." Mason clenched his fists. "You were running from slavers?" She nodded. He looked at Ravax. The boy was thin, too thin, and his skin was cold despite the heat around him. "Why didn't they take you when you ran?" She answered in pieces. "I take wire. Cut leg. Bleed. Hide near other dead. Smell." "Same." Mason stared at her. She had injured herself on purpose, just to seem like one of the corpses. He had heard of people doing desperate things before. But this was something else. "You did that to protect your son," he said. She didn't answer. She didn't need to. Mason stood up and began opening food packs. He made a small warm meal, then handed it to her. She fed the boy again, bit by bit, like she had earlier. He coughed, then swallowed. "He needs medicine," Mason said quietly. "Real help." The woman looked up. Her eyes were tired but alert. "Outpost," Mason muttered. "There's a place. Few miles north, off the grid. They help aliens too. But we'll have to move fast and quiet." She didn't understand everything, but she caught the meaning. She nodded slowly. Mason brought out a soft cloth bundle. Inside were a few supplies: med patches, pain gel, small rations. He packed them into a sling. Then he took out a second thermal wrap. Without a word, he walked over to her and gently placed it over her shoulders. She tensed at first, but then she looked at him, really looked. She had seen many men before, hunters, soldiers, traders. All of them took, but this human gave. She opened her mouth, and for the first time she said, "His name, Mason." He turned to her in surprise, then she pointed to herself. "Nira," Mason smiled faintly. "Nira," he repeated. She nodded. Now they had names. A connection. Just then, the lights flickered. Mason turned to the small control screen and checked the scanners. His blood ran cold. Movement, Southridge. 5 signatures. He grabbed his rifle. "They're here." Nira's eyes widened. Mason turned to her quickly. "We have to go, now." She clutched her son tightly and stood up. Mason opened the emergency hatch in the floor, a tunnel leading out through a pipe. He motioned her inside. "Stay low. Stay quiet. I'll guide you." Without hesitation, she crawled in, and so did the boy, silent, weak, but alive. Mason followed last, sealing the hatch behind them. They had no time left, but they had each other. They were no longer running in fear. They were running with purpose. Asterisk. The escape tunnel was narrow and smelled like rust and old oil. Mason crawled behind Nira and her son, holding his rifle close and checking every sound behind them. The dim emergency lights from his wristband cast a soft glow on the walls. The boy, Ravax, didn't make a sound. He just held on to his mother. Eyes wide but calm. They had only gone 50 meters before Mason paused. He touched Nira's shoulder lightly. She turned back. "We'll come out at the drainage slope," he whispered. "Stay low when we exit. If we're lucky, they haven't reached that side yet." Nira didn't respond with words. She only nodded once and kept moving forward. Mason wasn't sure if it was fear or courage that kept her steady, but either way, she moved like someone who had already survived death once. She wouldn't waste a second chance. They reached the end of the tunnel, which opened near the base of a hill of scrap metal. The night air was colder now. Snow fell again, softer, but steady, blanketing everything in silence. Mason peeked out. No movement. He helped Nira and Ravax climb out first, then followed. They ducked behind a collapsed engine, breathing slow and quiet. Mason scanned the area with a small handheld radar. Blips appeared. "They're closing in," he muttered. He pointed toward the forest that grew near the edges of the ruined fields. "We go there. Cover, trees, shadows, will be harder to track." Nira looked toward the dark woods and clutched Ravax tighter. The boy was half asleep in her arms, still too weak to walk. Without saying anything, Mason reached over and gently took the boy into his arms. Ravax stirred, but didn't resist. Nira tensed, then looked Mason in the eyes. He nodded once. "I'll carry him. You stay fast." Again, no words. Just trust. Together they ran. The snow was deep in places, slowing them down. Mason's boots crunched softly, and Nira's thin feet barely left prints behind. They ducked between tall burned trees and rusted engine parts half buried in ice. It was a maze of death and time. Behind them, the hunters were getting closer. Low whir echoed in the air. A drone. Mason cursed under his breath. "No more hiding," he said. He handed Ravax back to Nira, then pulled a flare from his belt. Nira's eyes widened. "What is that?" He smiled a little. "Noise, light, distraction." He tossed the flare high into the air behind them and fired one silent shot from his pulse pistol to trigger it. It exploded with a flash of red and white light, loud enough to shake the trees. The drone beeped and turned sharply, racing toward the flare. Mason turned to Nira. "Go." Now they ran again, deeper into the woods. Snow crunched. Branches snapped, and the wind picked up, making the trees groan. For a while, it felt like they had a lead. Then Mason heard it. Footsteps. Heavy ones, not machines. Not drones. People. He spun and saw them, three dark shapes in the distance. One had a thermal scanner. The red light flashed in the trees. They've got heat trackers, he muttered. We have to break the signal. He looked around and saw a frozen stream nearby. Come on, he said to Nira. In here. He led her down the icy bank and stepped into the freezing water. It stung like fire against his skin, but it would mask their body heat. Nira hesitated only a second, then followed without question, holding Ravax tight to her chest. They walked through the stream, water up to Mason's knees. His fingers went numb. He didn't stop. Every second counted. After a few hundred meters, they climbed out on the far side, soaked but alive. Mason helped Nira up the ridge and into a hollow space beneath an old mining transport. They dropped to the ground and waited. Silence. Then voices. Alien voices, sharp, cold. The hunters were close now. Mason held his breath. His hand stayed on his pistol. Nira pressed her body around Ravax, keeping him warm. Footsteps passed nearby. One of the hunters paused. Mason could see his shadow through the slits in the wreck above them. The figure turned, scanning with the heat tracker, but the stream had done its job. No signal. After a few tense moments, the footsteps moved away. They waited longer, until they were sure it was clear. Mason finally exhaled. Nira looked at him. Her lips moved. Why? He blinked. Why what? Why help us? Mason looked at Ravax, then at her. I couldn't walk away, he said. Not after what you said. She frowned. Mason repeated softly, feed my son, not me. Her eyes filled with quiet shock. You understand that? He nodded. And you listened? Yes, he said, and I still will. Nira didn't speak again. She just reached out and gently placed her hand over his dot. It was the first time she had touched him, and in that frozen moment, despite the danger, they weren't alone anymore. The forest was like a frozen graveyard. Tall black trees stretched into the sky, their branches like crooked claws. The snow was deep now, almost to Mason's knees, and every step felt heavier than the last. The wind had changed direction now, howling behind them, pushing cold air through every gap in their clothes. Mason walked ahead, holding his rifle low, eyes scanning for movement. Behind him, Nira carried Ravax wrapped in both thermal blankets. The boy's small hand clutched her shoulder, his face buried in her neck. His breathing was steady but faint. Mason stopped for a moment and looked back. You okay? He asked. Nira gave a small nod, but her lips were pale, her steps slower. He stepped closer and gently reached for the boy. Let me carry him a while. She hesitated, then nodded again. Mason took Ravax in his arms, careful not to wake him. He was lighter than he should have been, bones too sharp under thin skin. We'll find warmth soon, Mason said quietly, more to himself than anyone else. He led them deeper into the woods. There were no more paths, no signs of life, just broken stumps and frozen silence. The trees began to change, thicker trunks, closer together. Mason recognized the area. We're getting close to the old station, he said. There's shelter there, not much, but enough. Nira didn't speak. She only walked, her arms wrapped around herself now. She was shivering harder with every step. Mason slowed down. You're freezing. She didn't respond. He looked around. A few yards ahead, he saw a fallen tree, hollow and wide enough to crawl into. He quickly moved toward it, lowered Ravax onto a patch of moss, and helped Nira inside first. The tree's inside was dry. A small miracle. Mason pulled out a heat pod from his pack, his last one. He snapped it, and it began to glow with a soft orange light, giving off gentle warmth. He placed it near Nira. She leaned toward it, her body shaking violently now. Without thinking, Mason took off his coat and placed it around her shoulders. Flinched. He paused. I'm not trying anything. You need it more than me. Nira slowly relaxed and pulled the coat tighter. Mason leaned against the wall of the hollow tree and held Ravax in his lap. The boy was still sleeping. Mason looked at the small horn on his head again, strange, yet oddly human in his quiet breath. Then Nira spoke. My people once lived in sky towers. Cities above clouds. We had songs in the wind. Mason blinked, surprised to hear her voice. What happened? She stared at the heat pod. They came, not you, others, took our towers. Crushed. Them, sold us. Mason frowned. You were peaceful? We had no army. We had no war. They said we were easy. She looked at him now, her violet eyes sharp despite her pain. Do all humans want war? Mason sighed. No, not all. But some don't care. Until it's at their door. I did nothing for years. I watched things happen on other worlds and said, not my problem. He glanced at Ravax. Then I saw you. You weren't asking for help. Just asking someone to feed your child. Nira lowered her head. Because I thought I would die anyway. Mason said nothing. The heat pod was dimming. He stood up. We need to keep moving. There's a building. Not far now. We can rest there longer. He helped Nira up. She tried to stand but stumbled. Mason caught her quickly. You can't walk far in this cold. He looked down at Ravax, then up at her. Let me carry both of you. Nira blinked. No. But before she could finish, Mason lifted the boy into one arm and offered his other shoulder to her. You're light, he said, like frost. She gave him a tired, soft laugh. The first sound of joy he had heard from her. With Nira leaning against him and Ravax in his arms, Mason pushed forward through the snow. Each step was hard, but he didn't stop. He wasn't a soldier now. He wasn't following orders. He was just a man trying to save a family. The trees finally opened, revealing the shadow of an old research station built into a cliff. The windows were cracked, but the walls still stood. Mason kicked the half-frozen door until it gave way. Inside, it was dark and dusty, but dry. He placed Ravax gently on an old seat and helped Nira lie down near a broken heater. He used his knife to spark a fire from broken furniture. The flames lit up their faces. Nira watched him closely. You, strange human. Yeah? He said with a smirk. You run from war, but you carry strangers. Mason looked into the fire. I guess I'm running from who I was. Nira slowly leaned her head back, her voice barely a whisper. Then maybe you're running the right way. Asterisk. The fire crackled softly in the corner of the ruined station. It lit the walls with flickering orange light, casting long shadows. Wind still hissed through the cracks in the broken windows, but inside, there was peace for now. Mason sat on the cold floor near the fire, holding a broken piece of metal in one hand and sharpening it with a small rock. It wasn't much of a weapon, but it would do in close combat. His rifle was down to 2 shots. Not enough. He glanced at Nira and Ravax, sleeping beside each other on a makeshift bed made from old coats and padding. The boy's head rested on her arm. Her other hand gently held his fingers even in sleep. Mason smiled slightly. That bond stronger than blood, stronger than war, was what kept them alive. But the smile didn't last. His tracker beeped once. Low sound. A quiet warning. Movement outside. His body tensed. He grabbed the rifle and moved to the window. Through a crack in the frosted glass, he saw red lights in the trees. They moved slowly. Carefully. Hunters. Double quotes. They found us, he whispered. He rushed back and knelt beside Nira, touching her arm. She woke instantly, eyes alert, as if she had been trained by fear itself. Get ready, Mason whispered. They're coming. She sat up and lifted Ravax into her arms. Where? Nowhere left to run, Mason said. We hold them here. She looked around the broken room, her face tense. How many? 3, maybe 4. Nira reached behind her and pulled out the sharp scrap blade Mason had given her earlier. Her hands were steady now. Mason placed his rifle near the door and set a small trap, a gas canister connected to a broken wire. One wrong step and it would blow. Not a big blast, but enough to knock someone down. Then he turned to Nira. If anything happens, take Ravaks and run. Don't wait. She narrowed her eyes. No. This isn't a choice. I said no. Mason stared at her. The fear in her eyes was gone. Now, there was something else. Fired at the first blast hit the front wall. Dust rained from the ceiling. A voice shouted in an alien tongue, full of threats. Mason grabbed his rifle and crouched low. Showtime. Another crash this time. The door flew open, torn from its hinges. A figure stepped in with glowing armor and a plasma gun. His eyes scanned the room. Then Mason opened fire. The first shot hit the enemy's leg, making him fall. Mason fired again, hitting his shoulder. One down. 2 more rushed in through the side wall, breaking it with heavy boots. Nira threw her blade with force. It hit one square in the chest. He howled and stumbled. Mason ducked behind the fire barrel and tackled the last one as he entered. They rolled across the floor, knocking over furniture. The alien pulled a knife long and curved. Mason blocked the slash with his arm, pain shooting up to his shoulder. He growled and slammed his forehead into the enemy's face. Blood sprayed. They kept fighting, punches, kicks, steel and bone. Then dash click. The gas trap. Mason dove to the side. Boom. The blast threw dust everywhere. The alien was slammed into the wall, knocked cold. Mason coughed hard and looked around, dazed. Smoke filled the room. The fire was dying. He crawled toward Nira's side. She was kneeling, holding Ravaks tightly, her back against the wall. Blood dripped from her arm, but her eyes were calm. You're bleeding, Mason said. So are you. He looked at his arm. A long cut. But he ignored it. Outside, no more movement. Silence. Mason stood up, rifle ready. He stepped over the knocked-out invaders. 1 still breathed. 2 were dead. The last one missing. Stay here, Mason told Nira. He moved toward the broken wall, stepping out into the snow. Nothing. Just wind and falling flakes. Then a low growl. Behind him, the last one. He turned too late. The alien slammed into him, knocking the rifle from his hands. They crashed into the snow, fists flying. Mason kicked hard, but the enemy was stronger, heavier. The alien raised a blade high. Then a scream. Nira. She charged from behind and drove a metal pipe straight into the alien's side. He screamed, twisted, and Mason used the moment to grab the blade and drive it deep into his neck. The body fell still, breathing hard. Mason dropped to one knee. Nira stood beside him, shaking, her hands red with blood. You came out, he said. Between breaths. I told you, she replied. No running. He looked up at her. You saved my life. She didn't answer. She didn't have to. The wind blew softly. The snow continued to fall. Together they dragged the bodies away from the station, covered them in broken parts, and hid all signs of the fight. When they returned, Ravaks was still asleep. Safe. They sat beside the fire again, quiet but close. Now they had 1. But Mason knew one thing. This was no longer about orders. No longer about duty. This was his fight now, and he wouldn't stop until they were free. The snow had stopped falling by morning. The forest was quiet. Not peaceful, just tired. Like it had watched too much pain and wanted to rest. Inside the broken station, the fire was out. Mason sat by the cold ashes, patching the wound on his arm with shaking hands. Nira leaned against the wall nearby, her arm bandaged with cloth from Mason's coat. Ravaks slept quietly, wrapped in both thermal blankets, his breathing steadier than before. For the first time in days, there was no sound. of drones. No red lights in the sky. No hunters in the trees, but Mason knew it wouldn't last. They had killed slavers. Someone would notice. More would come. We can't stay here, he said without looking up. We need to reach the outpost. Nira nodded slowly. Her voice was hoarse. Where is it? 3 kilometers east, beyond the ridge, hidden in the rocks. What is it? Mason looked at her. A place where humans and aliens live together. No chains, no guns, just survival. She blinked. Why haven't I heard of it? Because it's not on any map, Mason replied. It's real, but fragile. He stood up and walked over to a small rusted console. He pulled out a communication unit, a small square with a blinking light. Dusty, almost forgotten. This thing can send a signal to the outpost, he said. If it still works. Nira moved closer, watching as he flipped it open and adjusted the frequency. Static. He kept trying. After a few moments, a low beep came. Then a voice crackled through. Outpost Echo 7. State your code. Mason leaned. In code Delta 4 Mason. Urgent priority. Civilian refugees in need. Medical assistance required. A pause. Then the voice returned. Code accepted. Location? Mason looked out the window. Northern Station ruins. We fought off a slaver team. Might be more coming. We need evac. Understood. Hold position. 8 to 2 hours. Stay dark. The unit went silent. Mason sighed and closed it. They're coming, he told Nira. She closed her eyes, relief washing over her like warm water. Thank you. You're safe now. But Nira shook her head. Not yet. Not until the boy is far away from this place. She knelt beside Ravax and stroked his hair. Her hands still shook, but there was strength in them now. She looked at Mason. You gave us hope. Mason sat beside her. You gave it to me first. She raised her eyes. How? He smiled faintly. You could have begged for food. Or mercy, but you didn't. You asked only for your son. She said nothing. Mason looked down at the small, tired child. I've seen a lot of pain in my life, he continued. But that one moment, your words, they changed something in me. She nodded slowly, her voice quiet. Then maybe. They'll change others too, Mason blinked. What do you mean? She pointed to his communicator. Tell the story. Mason hesitated. You want me to broadcast it? Yes, she said firmly. Show them what real mercy looks like. What love looks like, even when the world is ending. He stared at her, then nodded. He reopened the communicator and switched to the open civilian band. Recording. The machine blinked. Mason took a deep breath. This is Soldier Mason Ward. Formerly under Command Sector 12, he began. I have a message for anyone listening. For any human who thinks the galaxy is only black and white. He paused, then looked at Nira. I met a woman in the ruins of a broken world. She had nothing, no food, no protection. Just her son. And when my drone found her, she didn't scream or run. She looked straight into the lens and whispered, Feed my son, not me. His voice broke slightly. That moment, it changed me. He looked into the communicator as if speaking to the whole galaxy. There are people out there, not just humans, who love, who cry, who protect, just like us. If we ignore that, we lose what makes us human. He ended the recording and sent the message into the open channels. For a while, the room was silent again. Then the sound of engines. Mason stepped outside. In the distance, a ship was approaching, small, fast, painted with no flag. A rebel. Evac vessel. He turned to Nira. They're here. She lifted Ravax into her arms. The boy opened his eyes. Mama? He whispered. She kissed his forehead. We're safe now. The ship landed in the clearing. A ramp opened. 2 medics ran out with scanners and blankets. Mason helped Nira onto the ramp, carrying her bag. The medic took Ravax and scanned him. Quickly, he's malnourished, weak but stable, one said. Nira sat down and took Mason's hand. You saved us. Mason shook his head. You saved me too. As the ramp began to rise, Nira held onto his fingers tightly. You're coming. Too, Mason smiled. I go where you go. She let out a breath she didn't know she was holding. The ship lifted off. Rising above the trees behind them, the forest grew smaller. The ruins disappeared in white fog. And somewhere in space, the message Mason had recorded began to spread. It reached colonies, ships, rebel cells. And it reminded everyone that kindness is not weakness, and that one mother's words had lit a fire across stars.